Good morning.
And do you accept that the notion of suspending, proroguing Parliament is now dead?
Well, I've never thought it was a sensible idea and a realistic idea that no Prime Minister was going to suspend Parliament for an extended period. It would be against all our democratic traditions, and our Constitution works by convention, not by strict rules. So something that was never going to happen is now slightly harder to do.
In that case, if it was never going to happen, why didn't Boris Johnson just simply rule it out and would have prevented this Conservative rebellion?
Because, as always, there's prorogation and prorogation. There's this fear that Parliament might be prorogued for an extended period that has become a windmill for people to tilt at. There was a suggestion of prorogation around the Cooper-Bowles-Letwin bill when parliamentary procedures had been upended to allow a bill to make some progress. The prorogation would have stopped a bill. That was where the discussion originally started, and that is something that may have to happen at a future date, but that would be for a day or two to bring Parliament back and would be a response to an abuse of parliamentary procedures in the first place.
Well, we've just been hearing that idea of seizing control of the parliamentary timetable, trying to pass legislation, is still very much alive amongst people who want to stop no deal. And doesn't what happened yesterday mean that you can't prevent them from doing that?
Well, when they say they want to stop no deal, what they really want to do is stop Brexit altogether. That all the people who are voting in this way are people who campaign to remain and have never really accepted the result and want to overturn it.
Well, that may or may not be the case, but on this tactic.
It's really important because they don't have the courage to stand up and say, let's snub the British voters, let's say no to 17.4 million people. They say, oh, we don't want no deal. But actually, that is what they passed into law. So Parliament voted for the Article 50 Act and the Withdrawal Act, both of which provide that the default position is that we leave on the 31st of October with or without a deal.
We've heard about various different methods that they might be able to prevent that default position from happening. And if you're unable to prorogue Parliament, can't they do just that?
Well, it's quite difficult unless they have a vote of no confidence. And they don't want to do that because they're all frightened they'll lose their seats, because any Conservative who voted against the government on a vote of no confidence would be automatically deprived of the whip. So it's a sort of a game where they're trying to bluff their way to stopping us leaving without having the courage to stand up and say that they want to remain, and that's what they're aiming for, or that they're willing to risk their seats by voting against the government in a vote of no confidence.
Short of a vote of no confidence, couldn't they pass a vote asking for an extension beyond the deadline?
Well, they would have to provide for the Prime Minister to ask for this in such precise terms that the Prime Minister had no option but to ask for it. When Theresa May asked for an extension prior to the 29th of March, that was nothing to do with Parliament. That was her decision as Prime Minister. So the question really will be, does the Prime Minister have the backbone to go ahead and ensure that we leave? And I think Boris Johnson does. Or would the Prime Minister be in the same position as Theresa May and give in to this type of pressure?
Or might he, if indeed it is Boris Johnson who's elected, might he have to respect the will of Parliament and accept that Parliament is sovereign if they do indeed vote, for example, to ask for an extension?
Parliament is, of course, sovereign through law, not through motion. And if it wants to repeal the Article 50 Act, and if it wants to repeal the Withdrawal Act, then the Prime Minister would not be able to take us out on the 31st of October. But Parliament seems to show no sign of wanting to do those two things. It just wants to play footsie with the date. And that's pretty ridiculous. And it's actually rather weak-minded because people are not saying what they truly believe. They are fiddling around at the edges. The law is quite clear, and a lot of the MPs, saying they now think no deal is unconscionable, voted both for the Article 50 Act and for the Withdrawal Act.
Now, if Boris Johnson is elected, he will presumably go to the European Union, try to get a better deal. Some people in Europe have described that as the idea of putting lipstick on a pig, but anyway. Would you be prepared to vote for a deal? I mean, you did vote for the withdrawal agreement last time, didn't you?
Well, I think the withdrawal agreement was a bad agreement and that the backstop is a particularly bad part of a bad agreement, but that Boris Johnson's made clear that the withdrawal agreement is defunct and that the backstop will not work. So it's going to have to be something new, and I would suggest it's going to need to be something much simpler. That is to say, the guarantee of citizens' rights and moving towards a free trade deal.
So anything, just for the sake of clarity, so anything which includes the current backstop, even if it had a timetable on it, you would never vote for it?
Well, you've got to listen to what Boris Johnson says rather than what I say, because Boris Johnson is authoritative in this.
He said on Monday, yes.
Assuming he becomes leader, which I think looks quite likely. And what he said on Monday, I think, is absolutely the right position to have. I completely support it.
Jacob Rees Mogg and earlier Stephen Hammond, thank you both.